And then today's speaker, Priya Jayadev, and she brought one of the nurses that work in the volunteer hospice program here. So Priya Jayadev holds a doctorate in cell biology from Duke University and worked for 11 years in the pharmaceutical research and development industry prior to moving to the Olympic Peninsula in July of 2011. In October 2013, Priya became executive director of Clallam Mosaic, a nonprofit that serves individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She grew the organization's programs and staff over a period of 9 years. In September 2022, Priya became executive director of Volunteer Hospice of Clallam County, VHOCC. She followed Jury, who we had here several years ago, and she's going to give an update on the program and the values it brings to our community. During her time at VHOCC, Priya has focused on the strengthening both the clinical and mission support teams, becoming familiar with the palliative and hospice care arenas, and nurturing collaborative relationships. She currently serves as the Vice President of the Nonprofit Association of Washington and the Port Angeles Chamber of Commerce Boards. Please welcome Priya Jayadev and Becca, and Priya will introduce Becca more formally.
Thank you for having us here. So as Kathy said, Becca Ward is here with me. Becca is one of our field nurses, and she has 9 copies of hard copies of the presentation, which she'll pass out. So maybe one per table, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. But if you need more hard copies, or if you'd like an e-copy, I can always send that to you. Yeah. And Becca's going to jump in where I have gaps. But generally, I'm just going to fly through what I've got as slides and ask questions anytime. I don't mind being interrupted. And if I'm talking too fast, throw something at me. Okay. So if we have this slide. So as Kathy mentioned, I'm with Volunteer Hospice. Well, Becca and I are with Volunteer Hospice of Clallam County. We do both hospice and palliative care. And I'm going to go into a little bit of what all that means, right? So if you have the next slide. Oh, 1 second. And the next slide. So death and dying. People hate talking about death and dying, right? It's a difficult topic to discuss as it usually brings up a lot of feelings: anxiety, fear, awkwardness, sadness. We tend to pretend as a culture that it's not going to happen. But as John Cleese says, life is a terminal disease. We do need to talk about it, and the better we are in terms of talking about it, the better prepared we are, and the more likely we are to actually have that end of life experience be the experience that we would wish it to be for ourselves. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, there's a lot of words on this on many of my slides. The point isn't that you read every single word. I'm just going to kind of gloss over the key points, if that makes sense. So the experience of dying in the U.S. is oftentimes a difficult one, right? It's an experience of fragmented care. It's an experience of inadequate treatment of distressing symptoms, frequent transitions in care settings, and lots and lots and lots of caregiving responsibility for families, for friends, for paid caregivers. It's a ton of responsibility. 80% of Americans prefer to die at home. Only 25% actually do. So that's where, if you go to the next slide, it's partly because the U.S. healthcare system isn't a fee-for-service model. And that partly determines how we deliver care across the life cycle, but especially at end of life, right? But what we know is that the healthcare system consumes a great deal of the dollars that the U.S. spends. If you consider the amount of spending on healthcare, it constitutes 19% of the gross domestic product of the country, right? And the majority, and a large portion of that, 1.2 trillion, is actually for care of older adults and for end of life. And it's been shown that 1/3 of personal healthcare spending actually happens people 65 and older. It's also been shown that hospice and palliative care at that period of time can actually save dollars. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to go into what is hospice and palliative care, right? I'm throwing these terms around, but what the heck does that mean? And I think the Hong Kong Society for Promotion of Hospice Care says it best. When days cannot be added to life, add life to days. That's the core of what hospice is about. It's about improving that end of life experience so that each person's journey is the best journey possible. But from a definition side, if you go to the next slide, palliative care, I'll start with palliative care and then I'll go into hospice care, which is a subset of palliative care. Okay, I'll start there. Palliative care is a specialized medical care for people living with a serious life-limiting illness, cancer, dementia, heart disease. There's a number of things that constitute life-limiting illness, right? People who are receiving palliative care have gotten a diagnosis of life-limiting illness, but they may continue to pursue curative therapies, chemotherapy for cancer, continue to take medications for heart disease, all of those things, right? But they have a life-limiting illness that is impacting their life significantly. Palliative patients can receive comfort and curative care. It helps patients make critical medical and treatment decisions, and it engages in an interdisciplinary team of individuals, which I'll get into in a subsequent slide. The focus is on quality of life. It's on comfort and pain relief, most especially. So if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned before, hospice is a subset of palliative care. And if you look at what happens in hospice care and palliative care, there's a lot of overlap. The key thing to think about in terms of how this spectrum works is somebody receives a diagnosis of a life-limiting illness. They start in a palliative case. So this dark blue, let's just call that palliative care. But they're also pursuing therapies for their disease treatment, right? So this light blue is that disease treatment. As the progression of disease continues, the idea is that the care required shifts from that disease-focused treatment more towards that comfort, pain relief treatment, so that by the time that the patient is in hospice care, they're less pursuing that curative therapy approach and more focused on how do I make my end of days the best possible. Does that make sense? Yeah. So next slide. So as I said, hospice care is a type of palliative care. It focuses on end of life. There's data to suggest that the national median length of stay in hospice is about 17 days. But according to Medicare, which funds most hospices in this nation, the cutoff for qualifying as hospice patient is that if your disease that you are experiencing that is life-limiting were to follow its normal course of progression, you would only have 6 months or less to live. That's the definition of what qualifies you for Medicare hospice. If the disease follows its normal progression, the expectation is you, the patient, would have 6 months or less to live. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, as with palliative care in general, the focus of hospice care is on quality of life, emotional support, pain relief. But generally, with hospice, you're no longer pursuing curative care. So we're a little different as hospices go because we don't, unlike Medicare billing hospices, which say you cannot pursue curative treatment, we actually allow patients to pursue curative treatment to some extent if they wish to. So we don't have those barriers to entry into our caseload, which makes us a little bit unique. The idea is that we not only support the patient, but we also support the family so that they make appropriate end-of-life decisions that really follow their goals, their wants, their needs. And again, it's an interdisciplinary team. Unlike palliative care as a whole, Medicare funds the majority of hospice. So does private insurance, so does Medicare. palliative care generally is not funded or underfunded in general. Next slide.
I can talk about that. So one thing that's really unique about us is that a lot of times people find themselves like starting to approach hospice and they feel like they have to choose between getting the support of hospice, but they aren't quite ready to like give up like a radiation that could be helping with their pain or whatever it is. They need like a last ditch effort. And that's what's really cool about us is that they can get all of our services and they can still come to those decisions on their own instead of being forced into it. And that's just something I think is really special is we get to help them make the decision, but we're never pulling somebody of like withholding our services because they want something else, right? They want to try one more thing.
Yeah. And it's kind of a cool thing because if you look at our organization, we're like one of maybe 5 or 6 in this nation in operating in this mode. So it's kind of cool that it's in this community. As I mentioned, lots of commonalities in terms of palliative and hospice care. It can be offered in different settings. It can be offered in the home. Awesome, right? 80% of Americans want to die at home. It can be offered there. It can be offered in facilities. It can be offered in hospitals. As I mentioned, it involves an interdisciplinary team, which usually involves a physician, a social worker, a dietitian, therapist, nurse, nursing aides, spiritual counselors, grief counselors, and volunteers. Now, having said that, we are not in this same format of interdisciplinary team. If you look at hospice and palliative care in general, the majority of the work, day-to-day, hour-to-hour work, is done by nurses and nursing aides. The rest are there to support that primary work of the nurses and the CNAs. And that is the staffing we have. We have nurses and we have CNAs. We have social workers who are volunteers, and I hope to make that more formal in future with staffing for that. But that is a gap I think that we have, but that's a minor gap because we do have volunteers in that point, in that section. We also have volunteers that help with spiritual counseling and grief counseling and with respite care and with so many other things I'll get into in a little bit. But we do not have a physician on staff. We do not have a dietitian and we do not have therapists, which are required by Medicare billing hospices as required staffing within an interdisciplinary team. These are things that we come alongside the existing cohort of providers that any patient has instead of coming in and taking over the care of the patient. The supports, as I said, with hospice and palliative care is symptom management, coordination of care, and emotional, spiritual support and pain relief. Those are the key things that we focus on. So if you go to the next slide, there's a lot of benefits to referring to hospice and palliative care. And I'm not going to go into every single line of this. The bottom line is it improves the quality of life for the patient, for the family, and any caregiver that is involved in the care across the board, right? And it's been shown, if you go to the next slide, that actually not only does it improve the quality of life, but also the satisfaction, but also saves money for the people, for Medicare, which is the primary mechanism by which hospice is funded. There is dollar savings as a result of people going into hospice and palliative care. And there's anecdotal data. I mean, we've heard about Jimmy Carter, right? He's outlived his 6 months on hospice, right? Eating peanut butter ice cream on his birthday. But there's anecdotal data that suggests that people go into hospice and they actually live longer than expected. Why? Because the stress is decreased, the emotional trauma is decreased. It's just a piece of, it's okay. Yes, I'm dying. I accept it. Now let's make my end of days the best possible. Right? So next slide. Okay.
And with us, usually if somebody like graduates from hospice, they lose a lot of the services that they had been utilizing and needing. And for us, because we have like a more fluid transition, if somebody's on hospice and then they're starting to get better, we can just click some buttons and put them under our palliative umbrella. and they can still utilize our bath aides, our volunteers, all of our support systems. And no one's ever losing out on those services. And so to me, like, you know, people who get accustomed to having the help and then you just pull it all away, you know, it's not really helping the community. So I think that's a really beautiful piece of us, is being able to serve the palliative, and that fluid transition between people can go back and forth depending on if they're on chemo or if they're off chemo, if they're in a pain crisis or out of it. It can go back and forth based on those needs.
And that's actually a large conversation in the nation right now about how people are being discharged from hospice. What happens if you're discharged from hospice in general, not us, but in general, what happens is you lose all the services. Everyone that in that hospice palliative team goes away, right? You have to reinitiate your Medicare services on other programs, other settings. You know, it can be a very difficult situation. Not having a discharge because you've gotten so much better, but a shift to palliative and back and forth, it can be amazing. Becca was telling me a story, I don't know, about a month ago, about a patient who we had on our palliative caseload for months. And all of a sudden, he really took a turn, right? And within days, we were able to shift him from palliative to hospice. He died
one day. It was one day. He was a palliative, took a decline. Literally, I called our patient care coordinator, got a hospital bed, got the fire department to help me transfer him from a recliner to his bed, got him all the meds he needed. And this is within, you know, a couple hours. And now that family had full hospice support of somebody who was nowhere on our radar for a hospice patient, who would not have qualified for a normal Medicare hospice. And all of a sudden in one day, and within 24 hours, he was gone. And so if he would have just started the process of applying to get on hospice, a Medicare funded hospice, you know, they maybe would have had a couple hours of support, let alone like already having a relationship with them. I had been in there for months. They had the trust already there. And it was, I mean, I was there for about 5 or 6 hours, but it was so fluid and smooth of a transition that those are the moments that, like, I think we really, really shine and stand out from for being a completely free service and being able to support even a broader range than what insurance can cover.
So there are parameters by which you can, if you're looking for hospice care, if somebody that you love needs hospice or palliative care, you can go to sites like the Washington State Hospice and Palliative Care Organization to get information on how do you choose a hospice, right? If you go to the next slide, what you can tell is the key things that you should be looking at is the staffing, the time it takes to get someone admitted, the amount of times the staff will actually come out to the home to make a visit, the length of time that the staff will spend. Is it limited by, you know, you're on the clock, you got 15 minutes, or is it, I can spend 6 hours with a patient, you know, what is it? The respite support, which we also have through our volunteers, and the guidance and support following that, right? So I've given you a little bit of background around hospice and palliative care. So if you go 2 slides forward, let me tell you a little bit about Clallam County. As you know, Clallam County population ages rather older, right? We tend a little bit older. We are, I think, 5th, isn't it, in the state? Yeah, our state rank in terms of oldest is 5th in the state, and then we have 40-some counties, right? I think Jefferson County is number 1, just FYI. So we're an aging county, so hospice palliative care is an important thing to think about, right? So if you go to the next slide, in Clallam, we have 2 options. We have Assured Hospice, which is a Medicare billing hospice. They are now part of United Health Group. They were acquired by United Health Group from LHC Group, which was originally an organization that had 960 locations in 37 states, but now it's even bigger group. They are the Medicare hospice in Clallam County. Do we need them? Absolutely. They provide a number of services that we cannot. You know, I mean, we don't manage PIC lines, whatever, right? We don't do certain things. So they do that piece. They also do pediatric hospice. They are here to serve on the level. We are the other hospice, with weird hospice. We're the unicorns. We're independent, local, and we operate because of our founder, Rose Crum, being a visionary who said when Medicare, so she created, I'm gonna talk about this in the next slide. She created our hospice in 1978. Hospice as a concept came to the US in 1976. Yeah. And so if you think about it, like 2 to 4 years after the concept reemerged in the United States, here is little old Rose Crum in Clallam County that said, I'm going to make it happen here. And people were telling her, no, we don't really need that. We're too small a community. And she said, I'm going to make it happen. And then when Medicare came into the picture, she mobilized her son, Patrick, and Derek Kilmer, who was in the state legislature at the time, and said, I want an exception. I'm not billing anybody. I want it to be a free, community-focused hospice. And she got an RCW carved out for us to operate. We are the only ones that operate like this in the state. And as I mentioned before, we are 5 or 6 in the nation that operate like this. We're very weird. In a good way. In a good way. All our services free. And we provide both hospice and palliative care. We have a lending closet that's open to anyone in the community. Our grief programs are available to anyone in the community. Our care team is exclusively RNs and CNAs. We don't come in and take over. Many hospices come in with their little bag of here's your medications for hospice. We don't do that. We come in and we're here in support alongside all of your existing. Okay. And the focus of care is patient and family centered. And if you go to the next slide, this is a little bit about the history. Rose, our founder, incredible visionary, incredible person that made this happen. Born in 78 as an organization, has gone through a lot of changes. We've got our RCW exception, and this shows last year we were operating in a $1.7 billion budget. And think of the $1.7 billion budget with 80 to 90% of it coming in the door as donations and estate gifts. Literally 80 to 90%. This community supports us, and in turn, we support them, right? So it's kind of cool on that sense. If you go to the next slide, a lot of people say, well, you're free and you don't bill anybody and you're not really, are you real? And yes, we're real. We're a true hospice. We are real. We have staffing who are professionals, just like any other organization that's a hospice. We're 100% free and community funded. We have 180 cohort of volunteers and 11 board members. We have 13 registered nurses, 3 certified nursing assistants, and mission support. If you go to the next slide, a couple of things. We provide support. Our focus, as I keep saying, is on mitigating the disease consequences, right? So quality of life is the focus. It's comfort. It's about pain. Okay. And we serve this community, and the community gives back to us. If you go to the next slide, our current census is at about, actually probably today it's about 91. We have a majority of our caseload generally in the palliative numbers, but every palliative patient transitions eventually, right, to hospice. Majority transition. Some do actually graduate completely out of our service. That's very few, but some do. Okay.
And that's usually where we put people on hold, and we still check in with them every 6 months. And we're totally designed off of like their needs. So they pretty much tell us like, we know you only call once a month, but we don't want to be reminded that we're on hospice or something. Like, can we hold off? And so then we put them on hold, and every 6 months we're just like, hey, how you doing? Do you want us? Do you not want us? And it's completely led by the patients, which is, gives them a lot of autonomy in their care. And yeah, so those hold patients, and then when they do have a hard time, they can pop right back on services. So
if you skip 2 slides forward, we sometimes do not have patients coming on caseload once they've been referred to us. And entry point is always referral by the primary care provider or cancer provider or whatever physician thinks that this patient is appropriate for service. Sometimes the reason for our non-admission to our caseload is that the person does not have sufficient caregiving. Because while we are available 24/7, we are not there to put eyes on a patient. So one of the things that we have as a caveat to entry into our service is you must have enough care that someone would recognize if you fell out of bed and were unconscious and could call us, right? And would be able to provide that on a regular basis. Sometimes the patients refuse our care, and sometimes we do have capacity issues in terms of I just want to go into, if you go to the next slide, there's, I'm probably just going to do this really quickly. We do have a grief and bereavement program that is available to anyone in the community. Anyone. It doesn't have to be someone on our caseload. We have a soul care program with death cafes called Tea to Die For. We have speaker series. We have death doulas. Just like birthing doulas, there are doulas that focus on the death arena. We have a lending closet that's available to anyone in the community. Wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, hospital beds, mattresses,
Psych modes, I mean, everything.
incontinence products,
Yeah.
you name it, right? So we've got durable medical equipment and supplies. You're gonna flip through like 3 or 4 slides. Keep going, keep going. There we go. All right, so just to give you a context of what we do, in 2023, we served 278 patients. It represented over 2,000 nursing hours, over 1,200 certified nursing assistant hours, direct patient support hours, 4,100, these are visits, sorry, 2,000 visits, CNA visits, over 4,100 hours of care provided. We had 201 admissions, 186 deaths. We did a tremendous amount of respite grief bereavement and lending. We also deliver hospital beds and other medical equipment. There were a lot of miles racked on our 2 vehicles. And we had 178 active volunteers with a lot of volunteer hours. As I said, our budget is 1.7 million. Just as a quick thing, if you skip forward 2 slides, we do have a need for volunteers. So if you would like to become a volunteer, please contact me. And if you slip forward 2 more slides, these are the current needs that we have. So if you would like to volunteer in landscaping, either as a board member or in respite, we always have a need for respite. So if you would like to join us, please do. And then I'm going to show you 2 slides forward, a picture of who we are. You've met me, you've met Becca over here. But we have a whole cohort of administrative staff that support the mission, the mission. And the mission is delivered by clinical team manager Haley, our patient care coordinators Martha and Elizabeth, our new patient navigator Shelby, our part-time field nurses Lynn, Bifali, Becca, Danielle, and Stephanie, and our per diem field nurses Mel, Christy, Linda, and Janae, and our CNAs Jeanette, Ashley, and Becca. And then if you go to the next slide, our amazing leadership team is so supportive of the vision that Rose put together, and we are so grateful to them. I have a whole other section on caregiving crisis, but I'm not even going to get into that. I will stop and say thank you for your